And joining me now in the studio to discuss the attacks that left an indelible mark on the history of America is a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Bola Akinterinwa. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
In the last part of the report we just took, was seen that people are saying that this particular incident have changed their lives. And it is perhaps the worst terrorist attacks on home ground in the U.S. in history. That would be after Pearl Harbor. This has changed all of our lives in terms of how we now view security, hasn't it?
Yes, I will agree with you. Pearl Harbor has a completely different impact because the Japanese attack on the Pearl Harbor had an effect on the harbor itself. The ultimate objective was to prevent the United States from joining the Allies during World War II, December 1941, and that should be December 7. Now, unlike the Pearl Harbor, the 9/11 affected the Americans directly, as distinct from destruction of vessels, war vessels. The strategic calculation of the Japanese was that if they are able to destroy massively, extensively the war vessels, it would take the United States at least 6 months before they could reconstitute the vessels, repair, and then enter into World War II. The Japanese thought that by so doing, they would have gone through the Pacific and then joined the Italians, the Germans, in engaging in the war. But in the context of 9/11, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, Pennsylvania, it's not just destruction of property, houses, where people do live, but people were killed. They were crushed unexpectedly, and you can just imagine. I think it was United Airlines 93, which took off from Newark en route to San Francisco. Everybody was taking life easy. Nobody expected that, even though the Americans did not expect the attack on Pearl Harbor. But that was government to government. But when we are talking about people, for God's sake, I think it was most unexpected. And the impact prompted the U.S. to redefine its foreign policy attitude, one. It prompted the Washingtonian authority to decide to carry the battle to the doorsteps of the terrorists hiding then in Afghanistan. That was the basis.
And I want to get to that shortly, Prof. That what we saw in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in Libya. Just after that, but before that, let me ask you: can we say that 9/11, that particular singular event, sparked the wave of terrorism as we see it now today in the world?
No, I wouldn't say so. If you say where it spiked terrorism, well, in a way, but please, the origin, the genesis of terrorism should be traced back to 1789 during the French Revolution. That was the genesis. And when terrorism started, it didn't start this way. It started with letter bombs, parcel bombs. And by that time, what they were doing was simply to send letter bombs to U.S. ambassadors, European ambassadors here and there. That letter bomb, do you know what they do? Well, it used to contain something powdery, products. By the time you open it, with contact with air, etc., it explodes. When they send parcel bombs too, it is when you open that it explodes. And they have the remote control too
I was referring to the fact that even at the time you're talking about, the terrorism was not as rampant as we see today. Every region, there is no country that is almost spared today. And if it's possible to attribute that to the fact that the 9/11 attacks were as successful as they were, and then that emboldened terrorists around the world to begin to carry out further attacks.
You see, why you are right and why I'm not wrong is this. When terrorism could be said to be on the spike, intensified all along, it's simply because the attackers moved their focused attention from the United States to include other countries, especially the European countries, the allies. Initially, terrorism started as an opposition to U.S. foreign policy, to the attitudinal disposition of the United States in global affairs, to the way they comport themselves and why they want to be the policemen of the world. But now, it has now become what one American observer has said, clash of civilizations.
And that's why, sorry to interrupt you, Prof, because I have very limited time. You talked about the U.S. foreign policy. Let's focus now on U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East. It appears to be more militarist after the 9/11 attacks. Is there more than meets the eye in terms of the results that it has created, or militarism has fallen flat on its face when you look at what we're seeing, the light of what we're seeing now in Afghanistan?
Yes, I will agree with you. If you look at the origin of, we go back to this terrorism now in the context of the Middle East, is it not because Osama bin Laden quarreled with the U.S. that, look, the U.S. either the soldiers, the agents were trekking on a holy land, holy place, and it had to quarrel with the monarch in Saudi Arabia. That's what was responsible. And in an attempt to fight for their Islamic rights, etc., now they engage all their sympathizers to join. But the bottom line is that terrorism is on the high side, is on the spike now, simply because of the rivalry, the conflict between Islamic culture, Islamic education, and Western values. It's a question of order and counter-order, now amounting to disorder.
A lot of lessons to learn from this. We'll see how the U.S. plans some of the events they are planning for this weekend. Thank you so much, Prof, for helping us make sense of all of this history. Former DG of the Nigerian Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Akinterinwa. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.